Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to call the April 4th meeting to order, and I'm going to turn it over to Bill to give us a little preamble.
Thank you, Mr. Welt. Bill Dillon, LAFCO Legal Counsel. Today, both the chair and vice chair are participating remotely in Santa Barbara, while the primary meeting is here in Santa Maria. I've conferred with the chair, Mr. Lavanino, and he has requested Mr. Welt be the acting chair for today in order to avoid the logistical issues of a delayed comment when it's made from Santa Barbara over the teleconferencing. So, without objection, Mr. Lavanino's request to Mr. Welt will be the order of the day, and you will chair the meeting.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Tread lightly.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and justice for all. Jeez, we have to do that again.
I know. Speeding it up. Fast forward.
The clerk will now take roll call.
Commissioner Aceves?
Here.
Commissioner Geyer?
Here.
Commissioner Hartman? Commissioner Lavanino?
Here.
Commissioner Sierra?
Here.
Commissioner Stark?
Here.
Commissioner Waterfield?
Here.
Commissioner Welt?
Here.
Commissioner Williams? Is Commissioner Williams in Santa Barbara?
He is not yet.
All right. If Commissioner Williams does join us, he will be the voting member today.
Thank you. At this time, the next item of business is the approval of the minutes of the March 7th, 2019 meeting. Can I please get a motion?
Mr. Chair, I motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Second? Santa Barbara, second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Roger. It's been moved and forwarded. Can I get all those in favor, or is this roll call? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Aceves?
Aye.
Commissioner Geyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Waterfield?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams? Commissioner Welt?
Aye.
Chair Lavanino?
Aye.
Motion
you.
passes.
Thank you. Public comment. Now is the time for members of the public to speak on items that are not on today's agenda. Are there any requests to speak on items that are not on the agenda?
Chair Welt and members of the board, we have no request to speak in general public comment today.
Thank you. The next item of business is approval of the consent calendar. Are there any comments or questions from the commission?
If none, I would like to go ahead and make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Roger seconds. Thank you, Roger. Clerk, please take the roll.
Commissioner Aceves?
Aye.
Commissioner Geyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Waterfield?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams? Commissioner Lavanino?
Aye.
Chair Welt?
Aye. Thank you.
Motion passes 5-1.
Thank you. The next item is business item 1. Will the clerk please read that item into the record?
Chair Welt and members of the commission, business item number 1 is to consider recommendations regarding the proposed budget for fiscal year 2019 through 2020.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I have a brief PowerPoint to present.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Try and get the remote working. That's interesting. Okay. The proposed budget for fiscal year 1920 is presented to you today. And I'll go over some of the background materials that the LAFCO is an independent agency, commission established by the legislature, and this is just going back to the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act, to carry out specific duties and objectives. It's responsible for adopting its budget to fulfill the purposes described in the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act. And alternate Commissioner Sierra and I were looking at the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act, so there's places in there that specify things that need to be done, including the budget. And this is in Government Code Section 56381. Requires LAFCO to conduct a public hearing to adopt a proposed budget for the next fiscal year, not later than May 1st. I usually bring the proposed budget to the commission in April, and the final budget to the commission in May. So we transmit copies of the budget to the county, to each city and each independent special district, and then we bring back a final budget. One interesting thing about the budget for the 1920 fiscal year is that the budget is recommended for a decrease. We don't usually see that too often with LAFCO or with any other public agencies. There's a couple of really good reasons why the budget is recommended for a reduction. One is that I'm recommending increased revenues based on the current year actuals. We exceeded our budget for revenues by about 15,000, so I'm adding that into the projection for revenues. And as you know, that reduces the need for expenditures. There's a general fund cost allocation plan that is applied to our budget by the county auditor every year, and there's always questions on this about why is it such a large increase, because it's 2 years prior to adopting the budget that they recover indirect costs from LAFCO and other agencies, not just LAFCO. But the cost allocation plan decreased by $54,649. Usually we don't see that. We see a large increase in the cost allocation plan. And last year I recommended that we increase our contribution to contingencies and reserves by about $80,000. So combining those two, the cost allocation plan and not recommending any increase in reserves really decreases the budget by about 23%. So this is where the budget is laid out, salaries and benefits, and that usually refers to the commissioners who are treated as employees. The contractual staff costs, which is for the executive officer and the commission clerk, is the contracted staff support. And then services and supplies are decreased because of the cost allocation plan decrease by about $39,000 for a total budget of $385,750 that will be submitted to the funding agencies with the exception of the proposed revenues from processing fees. So the $385,750 is really what will be balanced in the need to get revenues from the funding agencies, and I would decrease the amount of money that's available from processing fees. So I'm going to be brief, but I'll be available to answer any questions. So I would recommend that the Commission review the proposed budget for fiscal year 1920 and accept all public testimony and approve the proposed budget as presented, and direct staff to distribute the proposed budget again to cities, special districts, and the county if there would be any changes. We've already sent out the proposed budget to all of those agencies as required by the Government Code 56381, and then schedule a public hearing for the final budget for the May 20th, 2019 commission meeting, which will be in Santa Barbara, and that would be our next regularly scheduled meeting. Happy to answer any questions. I think that most of the funding agencies are pretty happy that the budget is going down because they don't get to contribute as much money, and that our reserves are going to be held stable. We'll have about 200,000 in reserves, which is roughly 50% of the operating budget. But in discussions with legal counsel, those reserves are necessary for unforeseen expenses such as legal action, to cover any costs that may be required for staff transitions, or to pay for consultants if we don't have the money budgeted, if we wanted to go out and do a contract for consulting services for any projects that we might have. So I think it's prudent to have a reserve that's sufficient to pay for all of those expenses. But in this case, I don't think we need to add to reserves in the 1920 budget. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. Are there any comments or questions from the commission?
I have, I think, a half a question and a comment.
Just a half.
So, here's the question. Could you confirm that whoever is responsible for the accounting and the auditing of our budget is signed off that we have a prudent amount of reserves that would enable us to pay for contractors and other contingencies, and that's why there's a zero line in the budget? Is that correct?
There's a couple of issues related to that. It's up to the commission to make a determination as what's a prudent amount of reserves, and I've recommended that we be in the 30 to 50% range. When I consulted with the Auditor Controller's office, they said, well, you have reserves, so you probably don't need to approve as large a budget as this, because you could move some of those reserves and fund balance into the operating budget. And I told them, I beg to differ on that I think we need to have a prudent reserve in case we have, need a rainy day fund or need expenses that are not in the operating budget. So, it's up to the commission to set the reserve level, and I think this is a prudent amount.
Thank you. That answers my half a question. Here's my observation. I think it's very nice that the cap went down this year. The cap's going down in any given year is sort of like a rainy year, and people say, well, that means climate change doesn't exist because it's volatile. It could just as easily go up radically next year or a year after that. So I wouldn't take this as a harbinger of continued good fortune.
I would agree completely with that. So, and there's also a necessity at some point to make findings that because we decreased our budget, that it's not going to impact the ability of the commission to do its job, pursuant to the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act. And I believe that we still can do a very good job with the budget that I'm recommending.
Comments, concerns, observations, Santa Barbara? Commissioners?
Yes.
Craig?
Commissioner Guyer, I have a question for Paul. I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you down here, so I don't know if you mentioned what the reserve amount was, but I'd like to hear that.
I did. The reserve amount is $200,000. And it was going to be $230,000, but we had a one-time expenditure that we pay the county surveyor's office, and we budget for this $32,000 a year to do our mapping, and so that was taken out of the reserve amount that was projected, and it was decreased to approximately $200,000, which is about a little less than 50% of the operating budget.
Okay, and my second question is on the revenues from processing fees increased by $15,000 over budget. That's not a reflection that our fees are too high. It could be just that we guessed the wrong point on the budget last year.
It really depends on the activity that we have from applications, and we had a fairly large application that paid a significant amount of processing fees. Generally, when we deal with, it's based on acreage. So if we deal with mostly 5-acre parcels or less, then the processing fee is extremely low. If we get into the 150-acre plus proposals, then the processing fee goes up substantially. So it really depends on the type of application and the number of applications that we expect. But I think increasing the proposed and recommended processing fees by 15,000 is pretty conservative. I think we'll reach that for the next fiscal year 2019-20.
Other comments?
Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Hood also, please. Who advised you to take money from our general fund to make the budget? I missed that.
It was the county auditor's office that when they do budgets, they don't really take into account, what we have in reserves. They think that might be extra money in some respects, and they would recommend that we not have a reserve that is this high. And again, I said that I beg to differ, and it's the commission's prerogative to set the reserve levels, as long as it's not twice the operating budget, but 50% of the operating budget is reasonable. And I told them that that's been our policy in the past, and we want to keep an adequate reserve.
Well, many of you remember, I think we had to dip into $80,000 because we were charged late on monies that we didn't know that were due.
That's
to
correct.
cover some projects. I would hope, I'm okay with this for this year. I would hope that sometime this year, Mr. Hood, you come back with a 5-year analysis so that we can put in policy what the reserve should be to carry us over many years, and it should be incremental. So I'd love to have a discussion on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Seves. Thank you, Mr. Hood. At this time, are there any public comments on business item number 1?
Chair Welt and members of the commission, we have one request to speak on this item, and that is Kathy Howard. Kathy?
Oh, okay.
Which item are you here for? Pardon? Which item are you here for? I'm here to learn the things that impact the city of LAFCO. Okay.
Thank you.
Chair Welt and members of the commission, we have no request to speak.
Thank you. The next item of business is item number, I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh, sorry, need a vote.
Okay, I would like to make a recommendation to review the proposed budget for fiscal year 2019-20, accept all public testimonies, and approve the proposed budget as presented.
Is there a second?
I will second, but also there's 2 other parts to it,
Okay.
and scheduling the public hearing. So if we include all 3, I would second the motion.
Would you like me to read all that into staff recommendations A through C? I'm looking at 1 through 3.
Are we good?
We got it, we got it.
We got it, okay. Thank you. Roll call.
Commissioner Seves?
Aye.
Commissioner Guyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Waterfield?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
Commissioner Lavanino?
Aye.
Chair Welt?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, moving along here. The next item is business item number 2. Will the clerk please read that item into the record?
Chair Welt and members of the commission, business item number 2 is to approve and authorize the chair to execute an agreement between LAFCO and Paul Hood for executive officer services from April 4th, 2019 through June 30th, 2022 for an amount of $13,282.34 per month with annual CPI increases.
Thank you. Executive officer to report.
Mr. Chair, Bill Dillon, legal counsel. I'll handle this as staff since it's Mr. Hood's contract.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
This was on your agenda last month in March, and it's the exact same contract, but at the March meeting, the commission indicated you would like Mr. Hood to consider a 3-year extension to his contract rather than a 2-year extension. We weren't noticed for a 3-year contract extension, so my recommendation is if you wanted to do that, that's certainly fine, but we should, a bit cautious, but renotice the matter and bring it back. So that's what we've done. You have in front of you a contract that will run through 2022, and it's for the same salary. Mr. Hood's not requesting any increases in benefits or pay, so there's no changes there. He does get an annual CPI adjustment to his salary. So that concludes my staff report. I'm available for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Are there any comments or questions from the commission? All right. Take a motion, or what, public comment? Any public comment on business item number 2?
Chair Walton, members of the commission, we have no requests to speak on this item.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if there's no other discussion, I would like to make a recommendation to approve and authorize the chair to execute an agreement between LAFCO, Paul Hood for executive officer services from April 4th, 2019 through June 30th, 2022 for an amount of $13,282.34 per month with annual CPI increases. So that would be a total of 3 years.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Barbara?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Aceves. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call vote.
Commissioner Aceves.
Aye.
Commissioner Guyer.
Aye.
Commissioner Waterfield.
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Commissioner Lavanino.
Aye.
And Chair Walt.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right. Thank you for all that. Thank you, Mr. Hood. The next item is information item 1. Will the clerk please read that item into the record?
Chair Walt and members of the commission, informational item number 1 is to receive and file a report on the LAFCO Agriculture and Open Space Policies Ad Hoc Committee.
Mr. Hood, report, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Reporting back on the ad hoc committee, the Agricultural and Open Space Ad Hoc Committee meetings that we've had 2, and one was in January. One, as I erroneously mentioned, was on March 13th, not February 13th. So we met a couple of times, and what we are endeavoring to do is look at LAFCO's ag and open space policies and determine if they are in need of updating or if they are in need of revisions. And we're basing that on several factors. One is that we have received a couple of papers, one from the Environmental Defense Center, an open letter to LAFCO that was delivered to you some months ago. Also, the Cal LAFCO American Farmland Trust best practices agricultural open space policies that are statewide recommended for approval. We also looked at the ag and open space policies of neighboring LAFCOs, San Luis Obispo and Ventura counties, and had looked at the Creating Sustainable Communities paper. A lot of information from Cal LAFCO and some other Office of Planning and Research. So after we met on March 13th, the ad hoc committee directed staff to send requests for comments to each of the city planning agencies, community development agencies, and the county community development planning and development agency. So those were sent out on the 26th of March, and I'm asking that we receive a response by May 15th. Wanted to give enough time for the cities and the county to take a look. Also copied each of the city managers in the county executive office. And I think this complies with the direction from the ad hoc committee. So I will be bringing back any comments or recommendations for changes to our policies. I made a couple myself, and they are redlined and strikeout versions, so those could be included as well, and see what we get as far as a response. And then the ad hoc committee would meet in May, or soon after that, as we can get the responses compiled, and sometime late in May, probably middle to the end of May, and then bring those comments back to the commission at the June meeting for any deliberations and directions as far as amending the policies. So that's pretty much of an update. And we sent out the letter last week. Haven't heard much back from the cities or the county at this point, but I think that they will take some time and respond in time for the May 15th deadline that I proposed. So happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. Are there any comments or questions from the commission?
I have a comment or question. And then
Commissioner
I also
Lavanino.
wanted to let you know that we do have public comment down here for this item.
Thank you.
But so I just wanted to make sure, I remember there was a number of organizations on the letterhead that requested we look at this. And I don't know if we sent out a letter to the cities and the county asking for input of what we've done here. Did the ad hoc at all think about sending that letter to those organizations? I mean, I would really like to get some input from, for example, the Ag Advisory Council before we get too far along. So I'm just kind of curious when those organizations are going to get a chance to take a look at it.
Mr. Hood.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I did send a copy of the staff report to the Environmental Defense Center, and also will be sending a copy of our letter that just went out last week to them for any comments that they may have. And the Environmental Defense Center includes, as they pointed out in their response to me, the Farm Bureau and many agencies, about 15 or 20 agencies that are part of that group, so they could respond on their behalf. The other agencies, LAFCO, and I'm not sure any other agencies really would want to respond to the request, but we will include the Environmental Defense Center in that compilation of responses and recommendations.
Well, I don't want to cause any problems here, but it's going to be weird if we get down the road and Farm Bureau comes back or the Ag Advisory Committee comes back and says, I didn't get notice from the Environmental Defense Center. I know they're working great together. That's awesome. But is it incumbent upon us to notify those organizations or do everything through the EDC and assume that they're going to notify everybody? I mean, I appreciate the fact that they are. I'm just not sure if that's good public policy.
Chair Welt, I have a comment.
Commissioner Guyer, go ahead.
I also wondered why special districts, in particular in the Valley, weren't notified for comments.
Mr. Hood.
We, I think, as I recall, were directed to send this out to the agencies that had planning responsibility, the cities and the county. The special districts, while they could respond, really are not planning agencies as such. They plan on providing services, water, sewer, roads, that kind of thing. But certainly we could send a request for comments to them. And I think that Commissioner Guyer, that you mentioned that when we selected the ad hoc committee, that special districts probably should not be on that ad hoc committee, since we can only have 3, and we have 2 city council people and a county supervisor on the ad hoc committee. So we're limited in who can sit on that to 3 and still be an ad hoc committee.
Commissioner Guyer, any follow-up?
Yes.
Any other questions from the commission?
I feel it's better to get comments from as many people as possible rather than to have somebody say, I didn't have a chance to make comments.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner.
as a member of the ad hoc committee, I have no problem with extending the mailing list to make sure everybody has an opportunity. I think Mr. Guyer's reference was to actually send a letter to them, not have an additional person sit on our committee. And having said that, I think we might want to consider extending by 1 month the hearing before this commission to make sure that we get the letters out and everybody has an opportunity to respond to it.
Thank you. Mr. Hood?
So, Mr. Chairman,
I'm sure Mr. Hood's kind of Can I just weigh in a little bit?
Sure.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
I can't remember how many organizations were part of that EDC letter. Everybody was under that letterhead. You know, and it's great that this is probably the first time that I've seen that everybody's working together, which is perfect. I'm just curious how many there were. How many more letters would that be? Wasn't it like 15 organizations or something like that?
Yeah, we're looking at the letter, and there's about 10 or 15, 10. Farm Bureau, Grower Shippers Association, Los Veros Ranch, Edwards Ranch, Buellton, president of Rancho La Vina Corporation, Rancho San Julian, County Action Network, the Food Alliance, Citizens Planning Association, Branding and Packaging Design, Mark Oliver. So there were 10 at least that were
Right.
involved.
I think it would be nice for us to send a letter that says, hey, we appreciate the fact that you guys are all working together. We did want you to be aware of this, so that at least we have something in our record that says, yeah, we did notify SBCAN or we did notify the Farm Bureau or whoever, so that if for some reason they feel that they didn't get notice through the EDC, that we've got something to fall back on, is all.
Seems appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. We'll follow up on that with staff.
Actually, I have one hyper-technical question. Am I correct in the first policy that the committee added? It refers to two policies that assist in protecting prime ag land, and those would be the big ones, number 4 and number 5. Is that what they mean? Is that what that means?
I'm not sure. Could you repeat the question?
Sure.
I'm not sure I'm following.
My underscored copy of the committee's proposed addition. Under preserving open space and agricultural resources, there is a preliminary paragraph that says what a policy is, and it says the following two policies support the goals stated above and shall be used by LAFCO when considering, etc. And my question is, are the two policies that they're referring to the existing Roman numeral 4
Yes,
and the
5.
existing Roman numeral 5?
That's correct.
Then the new language in Roman numeral 5 is basically a mitigation requirement and an encouragement that cities and counties enter into memoranda of understanding. If I can,
That's correct. Those are the additions.
those are the substantive additions.
Yeah, the 4 and 5 are what are currently in the existing ag and open space policies, with the exception of 5 and 6 on Roman numeral 5, and then the preamble, which is an addition, which is underlined.
Mr. Chair, just also a clarification. That's Exhibit B to the staff report, and those are the staff suggested revisions to LAFCO's agricultural and open space policies. The committee has not made any suggestions.
I'm sorry, I assumed it was the committee, but it was in fact the staff recommendations.
Okay. Other comments, observations, concerns? Thank you. Are there any public comments on information item number 1?
Chair Welt and members of the commission, yes, we have 2 requests to speak on this item, and we are going to go to Jim Throop, to be followed by Nicholas Gonzalez. Jim?
And we have one down here as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Jim Troop, City Manager for Lompoc. And I wanted to let you know we did get the letter. We appreciate that. And we are working on a formal response to the proposed policy changes, and we'll be submitting that on or before the 15th of May. So we'll have that done and ready. I also passed out, and I apologize for Santa Barbara people that you didn't get this, but it's a very basic, it's from my Economics 101 classes, but it's about Lompoc, and it's supply and demand. We have an extremely limited supply of housing stock in Lompoc, but an extreme demand for it. The chart clearly demonstrates, for those that can see it, it's going through the roof on the rental rates. It just keeps climbing because we don't have enough housing stock down there to supply it. We have many, many people. We have 19,000 people live in the city that are employed, almost 13,000 per the county, drive most of them south because it's too expensive for them to live there. So they're coming in, which is fine. We want the people to come in, but we need the housing, the ability to grow and have the housing stock. I'm going to try and get through this quickly. Is one of the things LAFCO is not designed to wholly and fully just protect prime ag land. It was designed under the, if you read under section 56001, the legislature finds and declares that it is the policy of the state to encourage, and this is all emphasized, encourage orderly growth and development which are essential to the social, fiscal, and economic well-being of the state, which includes the city. Nothing in there about saying prime ag before everything else. It's all a balancing act to get in there, and the policy changes have me worried. That's why I want to be sure we write something. It continues, the state recognizes that the logical formation and determination of a local agency boundaries is an important factor in promoting, this is where again emphasizing promoting orderly development and in balancing that development between all the different aspects. With sometimes competing state interests of discouraging urban sprawl, preserving open space and prime ag land, and efficiently extending government services. But again, it's the whole package. It's not one portion of it. And I'm running out of time here. So one of the things I want to point out is that the policies and decisions over the last few years have come from LAFCO have highly favored preservation of ag land over other uses. And if you look at Lompoc, it's strangled right now. We're run out of room. We don't have anywhere to build more homes. The governor has declared his #1 priority is the housing shortage. And I can tell you, we would be more than happy and able to supply those homes if we had the ability to expand the borders that are out there. And it's critical for the city to survive. We're working on a hard budget right now. And without that ability to grow, we become a bedroom community. And you can't budget well for a bedroom community. You need the businesses and the other agencies that are in there to help keep the city whole. So we're having issues by not being allowed to expand. So we'll come back to you with our formal reply on the policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Nicholas?
Our next speaker is Nicholas Gonzalez, to be followed by Jay Freeman. We had an additional request to speak, and then we'll go to Santa Barbara.
Nicholas Gonzalez, resident of Lompoc. So I am very concerned, and for the many reasons that the previous gentleman just mentioned, the suggested policies are going to have a significant negative impact on the future ability of the city of Lompoc, and I would say the city of Santa Maria and the city of Guadalupe, and maybe even some of the more rural areas of the San Ynez Valley, to expand and grow both in housing. But in Lompoc, what's needing even more than housing is jobs. If you embrace the suggestions by the EDC, you are going to create a significant negative economic impact into the Lompoc community by not allowing any future growth of business. I don't quite understand why there's the extreme focus on agriculture. I have a 212, 222 occupations with the most jobs. It's a list of the EDD, Employment Development Department of California, listing all the industries in our county metropolitan statistical area. And ag is the #1 increase in jobs, but the median hourly rate is $8.93. You're going to force our community in the lowest paying jobs in the county. That is not economic or social justice as purported by these agencies that are making these suggestions. I'd like to submit this for the record. In addition, I have another document from the EDD that shows the distribution of industry throughout the county and through specifics. Ag is a very small portion of this. So why are we selecting one industry to get preferential treatment amongst all the industries? I think I'm going to be able to bring a pretty compelling argument in the future that this is a political move masked as an environmental move. I will bring forth documents from these very agencies that discuss their attempt to influence a newly created minority majority. The political shift is going northward. North County is growing. And if there has been a coordinated, collusive attempt to stop the growth of these communities and stop the power shift. And I think that this agency should not be caught up in that political maneuver, and I would appreciate full examination of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Our next speaker is Jay Freeman, and we had an additional request to speak from Jim Mosby.
Hey, Jay, welcome back. It's been a while.
Hello. So, Jay Freeman, I'm on the board of the Isla Vista Community Services District, but I'm not representing them today. I'm here speaking by myself. So I just wanted to support the comment about notifying special districts about the issues related to the modification to the agricultural prime ag land policy. I attend a number of meetings of special districts, and while I realize that areas like the St. Ines Valley and in the Lompoc and Vandenberg area, and I realize they don't have planning power per se. They are affected by these policy changes because it affects the sphere of influence modifications they might try to put forward, things like that. And when I've been speaking with various people at these districts, it comes up that they actually are sometimes concerned in either direction about this kind of policy. And so I just want to support the idea of notifying special districts on that. So.
Great. Thank you, Jay.
And our next speaker is Jim Mosby, and we will go to Santa Barbara after that.
I think this is...
Just briefly, I think it's important to look at Code 56668, parentheses P, when it discusses environmental justice for fair treatment of people of all races, cultures, and incomes. It does reference a little deeper on that, but when you're studying what you're planning to make the move for, please look at that component as well, and to be equal and fair treatment. And in this case, what is happening is over the change of time, the minority majority that's out there will be affected differently than the majority was affected in the past, meaning the South County areas that were allowed to develop annex without these burdens imposed upon them. And if you look in Santa Barbara Galeti area that has grown over their avocado orchards, and there's no requirement of a one-to-one. I mean, I know we can't make it retroactive, but the burdens that will be placed on these minority majority communities, Santa Maria, Lompoc, Guadalupe, are huge burdens that are going to be imposed on both minority majorities as well as financially deprived communities. So I think when you look at what you're planning on doing, you can take into consideration of that, and I think you can go back to the code, again, 56668, parentheses P, and see that you have the ability to analyze it in that direction.
Thank you, Jim.
Mr.
now
Chair?
go to,
Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara.
we will now go to Santa Barbara
Santa
for any
Barbara, we have
speakers.
Maggie Hall from the Environmental Defense Center.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Maggie Hall from the Environmental Defense Center, staff attorney. As you all know, EDC has engaged in this collaborative process with a diverse set of ranchers, local farmers, and entities like the Farm Bureau and Grower Shipper Association. And we went through a process where we reviewed the existing policies and came up on ag preservation, policies 4 and 5 that are detailed in this information packet. And we came up with a set of recommendations that would help fulfill LAFCO's duty in ensuring preservation of agricultural land, and a couple ways that those policies could be strengthened or at least clarified. Those recommendations were submitted to the Commission in a letter dated March 16th, 2018. And by way of background, as you know, LAFCO has a critical role in preserving agricultural land. The Cal LAFCO white paper states, however, that the legislation only provides baseline parameters and guidelines for LAFCOs, and therefore individual specific policies are necessary to carry out LAFCO's duty to preserve ag land. And just to provide some examples in the letter that we highlighted, we actually went through policies 4 and 5 and provided a couple minor red line changes in our letter. However, it appears that none of those changes have been integrated in the current staff proposal. For example, in this policies 4 and 5, there's varying distinctions between prime ag land and non-prime ag land. We think those simply need to be assessed so that ambiguities can be resolved. Policies 4 and 5 are ambiguous and vague regarding how ag land is to be protected, and should be revised to prioritize infill development to strengthen protection for ag land. LAFCO should also be encouraged to work with the county to ensure that when there are annexations, there are appropriate buffer zones provided for local boundary changes. Finally, we recommended that existing spheres of influence be evaluated to ensure compliance with policy number 2, which states that high-value agricultural areas should not be included in urban services spheres of influence. So we have reviewed the edits at Exhibit B in this information packet, and while we do appreciate the efforts to revise current LAFCO policy, we are disappointed that none of those changes integrate these recommendations that were submitted by EDC as well as the diverse set of stakeholders. And again, thank you for your efforts to expand the notice list. We do think it's critical that all parties be involved at this stage. We have provided, I have forwarded the information to the signatories on the list. However, today there was a conflicting meeting with the Agricultural Advisory Council at the same time as this meeting, so they were not able to attend. Additionally, I just want to make one comment about the current change at Section 5. It really only focuses on mitigation for loss of ag land. However, that's inconsistent with the purpose of LAFCO, the legislation, and the white paper submitted by Cal LAFCO. The white paper sets up a hierarchy for how ag land should be preserved, and the very bottom of that is mitigate. The top of that is to avoid impacts in the first place. So we think that any revisions to these policies should focus in the first instance on preservation of ag land and not how to deal with it once it's been lost. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maggie. Okay. No more public hearing? Oh, Commissioner Stark.
I actually have a follow-up question that's related to what I think Councilmember Mosby said. I'd like staff to confirm that my understanding is correct. My understanding of the term majority-minority district is a term that has relevance in voting rights statutes. In fact, it's a pivotal factor both in the Federal Voting Rights Act and the California Voting Rights Act. However, I don't think that the concept has any relevance, at least no direct relevance, to the balancing that Cortese-Knox-Hurstberg requires us as LAFCO members to undertake, which I think was correctly pointed out. We have to balance orderly development, the need for orderly development, particularly if I understand right, near transportation corridors and infill and things like that, with the need for preserving open lands, notably prime agriculture. That's a balancing action that does not involve any sort of political calculation as to the resulting composition of any municipal or countywide electoral districts. And it's none of our concern. And I appreciate it if we could confirm that.
Bill?
I think it's an interesting policy argument and comment. I think Mr. Mosby was mainly just referring to the statute in 5668 subdivision P, which does require consideration of will a proposal promote environmental justice, and am I on? Yeah. Will a proposal promote environmental justice? So it's something that we should consider, but I don't mean that to. I don't mean to get into the debate here about where LAFCO should stand on ultimate policy determinations. Okay. But I heard his comment is a little bit more, but I may have misinterpreted it. So
I may have misinterpreted it as well, if I might. I'm familiar with the concept of environmental justice, which, if I understand correctly, is the disparate impact of industrial development on minority populations who are, and that's what environmental justice primarily means. Whereas what I said about majority-minority districts, in fact, I believe I accurately said was a concern of the Federal Voting Rights Act. I certainly acknowledge what Cortese-Knox-Hurstberg said.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving on, the next item is information item number 2. Will the clerk please read that item into the record?
Mr. Chair, could I?
Oh.
Mr. Chair, could I respond real quickly on the last item before we close
Commissioner
it?
Seves, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to remind the commission that this report today does not have any ad hoc committee recommendations. The attachment was a staff recommendation. The committee will meet after we receive input from all the entities and then provide some direction. But that's why it's absent today. It wasn't because we chose not to put it in. It's because we are not ready to put it in until we get all the input.
Thank you for that. Okay, again, moving on. The next item is information item 2. Will the clerk please read that item into the record?
Chair Walt and members of the commission, informational item number 2 is to receive and file a report on pending commissioner elections and appointments.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. We are still involved in replacing some commissioners, special district regular member and special district alternate commissioner. And the nomination period closed, and we now have a list of candidates that were selected as nominees by the special districts. They are included in page 2 of the staff report. We had basically from the 38 independent special districts, we had, let me see, 7 nominations for the regular position and 3 nominations for the alternate position. 1 person was nominated for both. So following that, as a result of that, we sent out the ballots to each of the special districts and gave a 60-day response period. The votings will end on May 10th, 2019 at 5 p.m. Because some special districts only meet infrequently, and I contacted one special district, a cemetery district, that only meets quarterly. And so they had met the previous Monday, and I called them on Wednesday and said, we won't meet again for 3 months. So it's a matter of timing to get a quorum of special districts to respond and to nominate or to vote for one of the candidates for the regular and alternate position. So this is more or less just an update, an information item, and we will continue to operate with one special district representative, Commissioner Geyer, and hoping to replace an alternate and a regular special district commissioner, but we need to have 19 special districts vote, which is a majority of the 38 special districts, to file election ballots and select people to serve on the commission. Right now, we've only had, I think, 4 or 5 ballots that have been submitted, and so they have a considerable way to go to get the 19. But we'll start to contact them and urge them to submit the ballots in a timely fashion. And the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act stipulates that if we don't get a majority, we continue it for a period of time until we do get a majority. So this could go on and on. Hopefully it will be resolved by the deadline, which is May 10th. So happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. Are there any comments or questions from the commission? Is there any public comment on information item number 2?
Chair Walt and members of the commission, we have no requests to speak on this item.
Thank you. The next item is information item 3. Will the clerk please read that item into the record?
Chair Walt and members of the commission, informational item number 3 is to receive and file a report on the 2019 LAFCO staff workshop.
Mr. Hood.
Yes, again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. We will be heading up to beautiful downtown San Jose next week for the LAFCO staff workshop, April 10th through the 12th. The mobile workshop is a bus tour of Silicon Valley, and then we'll be headed back to the workshop. And it looks like just Bill and I will be attending this year. Jacqueline won't be able to make it, and Mike Allen cannot make it, but we will report back to you things that we learned following the conclusion of the staff workshop next week. If you have any questions, happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Hood.
Included a copy of the program and the mobile workshop flyer.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the commission? Is there any public comment on information item number 3?
Chair Walt and members of the commission, we have no requests to speak on this item.
Thank you.
We will now go to commissioner announcements and any requests for future agenda items. Any comments from commissioners?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Aceves.
Mr. Chair, I just had just a quick question. Actually, it was the item that we just handled dealing with special districts. If we don't get enough agencies to vote, is there no other recourse other than keeping it open?
No, I don't think there is, and it specifies that in the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act. We did not do a formal meeting of the Special District Selection Committee because we've had experience in the past where it's been very difficult to get 19 people in the room at the same time, and not to say that that's not possible, but I decided that it was not feasible to hold a meeting, although it would be, and we could end up with less than a quorum, but to send out mailed ballots and mail nominations. So I think that we are hopeful. Basically we will contact each of the special districts that have not filed a ballot and encourage them to, even if we extend it by 20 days or 30 days, to file a ballot and conclude this process. I don't think there's any other appointment agency except for the special districts, independent special districts.
Thank you. Any other comments from commissioners? Announcements? If not, we will move on to the executive officer's comments.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I received a phone call from the Los Olivos CSD acting general manager today when I was driving down to the commission meeting, and he and the district are in the process of preparing a status report on the Prop 218 election and what's happening in the district. And he thinks that the district is moving ahead very well and are happy to submit us with a status report. We did say we'd like to get something by mid-summer, but looks like they're going to try and submit something every few months to let us know what's going on. So that's, I think that's very good, and I encourage him to do that.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
That's all I had.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hood. I will now adjourn this meeting to Thursday, May 2nd in Santa Barbara at 1 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Good acting.
Good acting.